Raghu sat on the cold pavement, his back pressed against the temple wall. His clothes, tattered and grimy, barely shielded him from the biting evening wind. The world bustled around him, people coming and going, their laughter and conversations blending into a distant hum. No one spared him a second glance. Hunger gnawed at his insides, a familiar ache he had long stopped fighting. His fingers trembled as he reached out, hoping for a coin, a scrap of food, anything. But the few who noticed him only offered scornful looks. A man in a crisp suit tossed a dismissive glance. A woman clutching her purse tightly quickened her pace. Just as he was about to give up for the night, a soft voice broke through the noise. "Here, eat this." Raghu looked up to see a woman standing before him. She wore a simple sari, her eyes warm yet firm. In her hands was a plate of steaming rice and dal. He hesitated for a moment, unsure if this was real. "Take it," she urged. "Food and water, Dana Pani. Keep us alive. Never lose hope." His hands, rough and calloused, grasped the plate. He ate with urgency, savoring every bite. It wasn't just the food, it was the kindness that filled his empty heart. The woman watched him for a moment before turning to leave. "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. She smiled. "Help someone when you can. That's all I ask." Long after she disappeared into the crowd, her words lingered. Raghu leaned against the temple wall, staring at the half-eaten meal. He thought about the life he once had, a time when he wasn't a beggar, when he had dignity. But that life was gone, swallowed by fate's cruel hand. As the city lights flickered, Raghu sighed and placed the empty plate beside him. Tomorrow would be another battle for survival. Another day of hoping for a miracle. He closed his eyes, the cold settling into his bones. He didn't know that tonight would be the last time he would sleep as a beggar. Morning sunlight filtered through the bustling streets as Raghu wandered aimlessly, his stomach only half full from the meal the kind woman had given him. His bare feet ached against the rough pavement, but he was used to pain. It had become his companion. As he passed a wealthy merchant shop, something unusual caught his eye. A small leather pouch lay abandoned near the entrance. He glanced around, no one seemed to notice. Curiosity got the better of him, and he picked it up. The weight surprised him. Carefully, he loosened the string and peeked inside. His breath caught. Gold coins. More money than he had ever seen. His pulse quickened. A single coin could buy him enough food for days. If he kept the pouch, he could escape this miserable life, start anew. But something held him back. The woman's words echoed in his mind. "Help someone when you can." His fingers tightened around the pouch. The right thing was clear, but the temptation gnawed at him. He took a deep breath and stepped inside the shop. Behind the counter stood an elderly man with sharp eyes and a neatly trimmed beard. Raghu hesitated before placing the pouch on the counter. "I found this outside," he said, his voice hoarse. The merchant's eyes widened. He took the pouch, checking its contents. His expression softened. "You returned this? When you could have kept it?" Raghu nodded, shifting uncomfortably. "It's not mine." The merchant studied him, then smiled. Honest men are rare. He called over a younger man, his assistant. "Vijay, bring food for our guest." Vijay shot a glare at Raghu before disappearing into the back. The merchant gestured for Raghu to sit. "What's your name?" "Raghu." "You have work?" Raghu shook his head. The merchant leaned forward. "A man like you shouldn't be on the streets. If you're willing to work hard, I can offer you a job." Raghu blinked, stunned. A job? After years of begging, the idea felt foreign. I don't know anything about shop work." "You were honest when no one was watching. That's all I need to know." Vijay returned with a plate of food, slamming it onto the counter before stepping back. The merchant ignored his attitude and turned to Raghu.
"Eat."
"If you're willing, you can start tomorrow." Raghu hesitated only for a moment before picking up the plate. The food was warm, comforting. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope. He didn't know that with every step forward, someone was waiting to pull him back. Days turned into weeks, and Raghu embraced his new life with quiet determination. He arrived early, swept the floors, stocked the shelves, and handled deliveries without complaint. The merchant, Kapoor, grew fond of him, often praising his honesty and hard work. Customers, too, began to trust him, and soon, Raghu felt a sense of belonging he had long forgotten. But not everyone was pleased. Vijay, Kapoor's longtime assistant, watched with growing resentment. He had worked under Kapoor for years, yet never received the same praise or trust. Seeing a former beggar rise so quickly gnawed at him. One evening, after closing the shop, Kapoor counted the earnings and locked them in the safe. He stretched, yawning. "A long day," he muttered. "Let's go home." Raghu nodded, wiping down the counter, while Vijay lingered near the safe, his mind spinning with an idea. That night, while the city slept, he crept back into the shop with a duplicate key he had secretly made. Silently, he unlocked the safe, emptied it, and scattered a few coins near Raghu's sleeping area in the storage room. Then, with a satisfied smirk, he vanished into the night. The next morning, Kapoor stormed into the shop, his face dark with anger. "The safe is empty." His voice thundered through the small space. Raghu looked up, confused. "Empty." Vijay stepped forward, shaking his head. "I didn't want to believe it, sir, but—" He pointed to the scattered coins near Raghu's mat. "It's obvious who did it." Raghu's blood ran cold. "No, I would never." Kapoor's face twisted with disappointment. "I trusted you," he said, his voice heavy. "And this is how you repay me?" Raghu's chest tightened. "You know me. I returned the gold pouch. Why would I steal now?" Vijay scoffed. "A clever trick to gain trust. You fooled us all." Before Raghu could protest further, Kapoor called for the police. Minutes later, uniformed officers stormed in, grabbing Raghu by the arms. "Wait. I didn't do this," he shouted, struggling. Kapoor turned away, refusing to meet his eyes. "I don't want to hear another word." As the officers dragged him toward the door, Raghu locked eyes with Vijay. The smug satisfaction on his face told Raghu the truth. This had been planned. He had been set up. Thrown into a cold, damp cell, Raghu sat in silence, staring at the floor. The walls pressed in, the weight of betrayal crushing him. All his efforts, all his honesty, had led him back to nothing. He closed his eyes. Maybe fate had never intended for him to escape the streets. Maybe some people were just meant to suffer. But fate, as always, had other plans. Raghu sat on the cold jail floor, his mind numb. The betrayal stung more than the iron bars surrounding him. He had done everything right, yet he was back to where he started, powerless, forgotten. A guard approached and unlocked the cell. "You have a visitor." Raghu looked up, expecting no one. When he stepped outside, his breath caught. It was her, the woman who had given him food that night. Mira. She studied him, her gaze unwavering. "I heard what happened." Shame burned through him. "I didn't do it," he murmured. "I know," she said. "And I can prove it." She had spent the past day investigating. Her instincts told her Raghu wasn't capable of such a crime. She had questioned shopkeepers, followed clues, and finally, she found what she needed: the pawnshop where Vijay had exchanged the stolen goods. An hour later, she stood before Kapoor, placing the evidence on his desk. "Your real thief is Vijay," she said firmly. Kapoor's hands trembled as he picked up the receipt from the pawnshop. His face paled. Guilt settled over him like a heavy fog. "I made a mistake," he whispered. That evening, the police released Raghu, and Vijay was taken in his place. But as Kapoor approached Raghu with an apology, Raghu simply shook his head. Trust is not something you can give and take back so easily. Kapoor offered his job back, but Raghu refused. He had learned that stability built on someone else's mercy was fragile. Mira placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Come with me." She introduced him to an organization that helped people like him, those who had fallen but refused to stay down. With their support, Raghu started something of his own, a small food stall. Not just any stall, but one that offered free meals to those who couldn't afford them. One evening, as he handed a plate of food to a starving child, he saw himself in those desperate eyes. The cycle had come full circle. He remembered Mira's words from that first night. Dana Pani is what keeps us alive. Never lose hope. This time, he wasn't just hearing them. He was living them.